All right, I think we are live now. We can get started. All right, welcome everyone. Quick overview of today and what we'll be going through. We'll be covering some quick intros at the start, and then we will dive right into the presentation. The way I've designed the presentation is to have it a bit more open-ended as a discussion. So it's nice that we have a small intimate crowd. Feel free to jump in at any time if you have any questions. You can either come off mute yourself, or you can find the chat box and just type into chat. If you have yet to find the chat box, it is Alt-H if you're on a PC, or you can find the toolbar, and you just go to more, the three dots on the right, and there should be a chat function there, and that opens up the chat box. Yeah, again, like I mentioned, just feel free to chime in at any time, pause me, interrupt me if you have any questions. If you type into the chat box, I will read up the questions instead. And then there'll be some time at the end for Q&A as well. And then we'll wrap up at 7:30 sharp. Cool. So while we move on, while I'm going through some of the intros, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You know, your name, where you're from, what your business is, or what your business idea is if you've yet to start it. And then we can definitely connect with each other as well. So feel free to share your LinkedIn profile as well, and we can start to do some virtual networking too. So some ground rules, some housekeeping. I love to hear your insights as well. I find that not only with sales, but with many, many different things in life, different strokes work for different folks, right? So everyone has a different style. So if you find that certain tips, techniques, strategies work best for your business, and if you have any insights, feel free to share them. I do like to also try to create a welcoming and inclusive space for my workshops. So if anyone comes off mute, if you hear that they have a heavy accent or if they don't speak English really well, just bear with them for a bit. And if you do see that anyone is, especially in the sales side of things, holding themselves back, not being honest with themselves, feel free to call them out on it. So what I mean by this is sometimes, for example, when I work with entrepreneurs, I get entrepreneurs talking about revenue challenges and revenue problems. But at the end of the day, a lot of it sometimes boils down to personal preference and personal comfort around selling. So sometimes, you know, no matter how good of a strategy you implement, if you are simply uncomfortable with selling and you don't put yourself out there, and you don't actually start to take action to reach out, prospect, find customers, and you know, email or call them, then there is no amount of strategy that will save you. So if you see any of that happening, make sure you call it out as well. So community announcements. What I like to do to open up most of my workshops is anyone can come off mute and introduce themselves. If you have anything interesting to share, if you have any big announcements, big events, if you're hiring, if you're looking for a job, this is kind of the time to take the stage and share what you're working on. So if anyone wants to, do come off mute and just share.
I can get it going, just
Sure.
to be the first one to sacrifice themselves here. My name is Maybelle Santos. I am a social entrepreneur and also working for a startup called Drinkfill and with Andy Chu. Chin, I think you might know him.
Yes.
He was actually the one that shared this to me. And I've joined the company recently in the last month as their business development, sustainability / sales manager individual startup. So wearing lots of different hats. Have never really operated in a direct sales role. And so I thought this would be a good way for me to get introduced to a lot of concepts and ways of thinking in this space. Having been in the startup world for a while, I have been involved in sales practices before, but never as the quote unquote lead. So I thought I could just learn a few things from you and everyone else here. So happy to be here.
Great, thanks for joining us. And thanks for being the first one to jump on and introduce yourself. Anyone else?
Okay, so let's go for the second one. Hello, everyone here. My name is Ung, and I am a co-founder and CEO of we launched in our company. We are doing AI and robotics. Thanks Chin Chang for hosting a mini workshop today, because I'm very interested in doing sales, because when I opened my business, I got so many rejected from the customer when I try to email them or prospect them. So this is a very good opportunity for me today to discuss with you guys about how to like build the sales funnel and how to get approach the customer in the right way, so we can like expand the business properly. So thank you. I will email or chat here about my company more. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? I can share a quick announcement if there's some time. I'm working on a hackathon happening in October this year. So the hackathon is going to be a bit of a different type of hackathon. Most hackathons typically happen over a weekend. This one is actually going to be a 2-week hackathon, and it's designed a bit differently. It's designed to not only have entrepreneurs pitch their ideas, but it's mostly to help them work with active companies that are facing some of these problems. So it's called Do Good Business Challenge, and the idea is we will work with business directly. Companies will be paired up with different enterprises that have different problems, and they work with the companies to help them solve some of those problems. So if you're interested in finding more about that, I will post a link to that in the chat. Anyone else? All right, if not, we can get a move on. Again, feel free to type in your intro in the chat if you'd like to as well. And if you want to post your LinkedIn profile, you can post it in the chat as well. Great. Just want to confirm everyone is seeing the presentation screen. Great. So a bit about myself, some background. My name is Chin. I spent the last 5 years working out of an incubator accelerator known as Spring. This incubator accelerator focuses on supporting social ventures. So these are companies that are for-profit, but they also have some elements where they are helping the community for good, helping the environment, dealing with companies that are supporting mental health. So that's kind of my background. While I was at Spring, I was primarily in charge of growth. So I was helping them with finding the right companies and also working with the companies on sales strategies and improvements. And then prior to my involvement at Spring, I spent most of my time in corporate sales. So I was working for a telecommunications company known as Freedom Mobile here in Canada, and also for Bell. And you want the Facebook link to the live stream of the event? Is that what you're looking for?
Yes, please.
Okay, let me try to find that. I think this is the link. Post it in the chat. There you go. I think that's the right link. Let me just check. I might have been sharing the wrong screen. There we go. So yeah, that's kind of my background. So I hope to bring to today's session some insights between both corporate sales and startup sales. And I think there's a lot of great processes that larger companies have learned to implement, some tried and true proven methods. But also in the startup scene, I've had the pleasant opportunity of working with over 400 companies. So I think that diversity and experience can help bring some insights to different methods and different approach that works well for different types of companies. So there's, I don't like to believe that there's usually a one-size-fits-all. I think every company has a slightly different product, slightly different customer, slightly different approach. So hopefully we can kind of brainstorm some ideas that will be relevant for your company. So some key outcomes. I will go through some content today. There's going to be a lot of open dialogue for Q&A as well. But in terms of the content, some key things that I will highlight will include discussing sales versus marketing and how to build a sales and marketing strategy. We'll talk a bit about using funnels, how to optimize them, and we'll wrap it up on talking about salespeople and how to hire the right people. So quick question for all of you. I'm curious in terms of sales background, sales experience. Please type out in the chat box, like, what is your sales background? What's your experience? Do you enjoy selling? Do you have any specific concerns around selling? Ling is asking, am I going to cover advanced sales strategies or general sales strategies that you can apply? I would say that I will talk mostly on the general side. In terms of advanced, it kind of depends on what you define as advanced. I'm not going to go into specific techniques. So if you're talking about things like closing techniques, if you're looking about ways to overcome objections, those kind of things I won't cover too much. I'm going to talk a bit more about creating more of an organizational level sales strategy. So more about like what channels do you use? How do you reach out to customers? What kind of call to actions are good for it? How do you decide what content to create? That kind of stuff. I'm just going to read up Kenny's intro while any of you are still typing out some of the responses to this question here. So Kenny is from Malaysia. He runs a sports management company called 603 Sports. Specializes in soccer and ice hockey in Asia. So if anyone is interested in collaboration, his email is kenny@603.asia. Yeah, any comments? Anyone wants to share kind of their sales experience and background? Feel free to come off mute. Looks like Kenny is sharing, I got to sell the sports in Asia, lots of sponsorship deals, but deals here are nowhere as close to North America or Europe. Ling saying advance, I mean I can create a branding or expert image to our potential customers. Great, thanks for sharing. So quickly, maybe I can jump to kick us off by sharing some questions that some people were asking while they were registering for the event. So typically, I think when it comes to sales, a lot of people really find it challenging because they find that sales equates to manipulation. They feel that when they are in a position of selling, then they are trying to persuade people, trying to manipulate people into buying a product. So it feels very uncomfortable. And I think this is kind of a misconception because there are a lot of bad salespeople out there that have tarnished the image of sales. But sales, in essence, is really just distribution, right? When it comes to running a business, or if you're working for a company, at the end of the day, you have a product or a solution, or maybe it's even a service, and you're just trying to get it into the hands of your customers. So making sales actually encompasses not only the techniques where you're trying to persuade someone to sell, but it also encompasses the processes behind it. So like I mentioned, like how do you find the right customers, the right channels, how do you convert them, doing the right testing, many different things, content building, thought management, thought leadership, things like that as well. Just gonna read out some of the other responses. Selling doesn't really align with me too naturally, says Maybelle. I think I'm quite personable, but sales for some reason has never been a huge interest for me. Sometimes it doesn't feel natural for how I want to be interacting with people. Great comment there. That being said, I know the value of being able to sell. So I think throughout this session, you'll kind of understand my perspective on sales, and I think it will make you a lot more comfortable with the process. Anne is sharing, I have a concern doing remote sales from overseas. We are from Asia and are expanding to the market to Europe, US and Europe. Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of what I share probably comes more from a North American perspective, but I think it applies to Asia as well. But it'll probably be very helpful for both Kenny and Anne, since all of my experience and background is really based in North America. So hopefully it should give you some good insight on how a lot of North American customers tend to look at sales or look at the purchasing process. Great, so quickly I want to answer a few questions because these two specific questions came up that actually are not related to the rest of the presentation, but I want to make sure that I cover it. So one of the questions that came up in the registration was, someone asked, is it best to be launching a product-based business by targeting a very specific niche, strong part of the potential market? For example, for validation, community engagement, or creation? Or does it pay to be casting your net slightly larger? So to address this question, I think it does stem from a few things. So this is usually a problem that happens more for early stage entrepreneurs, for startups that are just getting off the ground. And I think it really stems from a personal lack of clarity on who you want to serve, which is fine, because I'll give you a personal example. When I started Classy Novel, the mission of Classy Novel is to help improve education by building awareness through personal development and also through soft skills. And who I'm interested in serving, who my customer is, I'm a bit open-ended about that. I'm willing to deal with education, I'm willing to deal with corporations, and I'm also willing to do the education directly and work with folks like you, like entrepreneurs or other students as well. So in my case, I think very similar to whoever's asking this question, there is a question, should I go after a niche or should I cast the net a bit wide and go after a larger market? And I think the answer to that recently came to my awareness through Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1. And I think it stems from two things. So number one is most companies, when they do a business pivot, they're usually doing a pivot and they're grounding themselves in something. So when you try to change something about your business, you're not changing random things all the time. You're not going from a self-driving car to a drone to an AI company, right? You're not just throwing shit on the wall and seeing what sticks. The best type of pivots are usually pivots that are grounded either in the problem or the customer. So what I mean by that is, if you're grounded in the problem, you might say, okay, I'm really passionate about solving education, but I don't care about who the customer is. If I find that universities won't pay for my product, I'm willing to go after a different customer if another customer is willing to pay for it. So then most of your experiments around validation are really designed to help you find who the right market is, but you are fixed on the problem that you're solving. On the other hand, if you're pivoting around the customer, then what you're doing is you might say, oh, I'm passionate about working with universities. So you might be married to the customer, but you're a bit more flexible around what problems you're solving for them. So if universities say, hey, you know what, we actually don't really care about soft skills, but instead we care about helping some of our students with getting jobs, with employability. Then we have a problem around that, and this is the problem, and then it's up to you to decide if you want to go after that problem and still serve the same customer. So that's really all up to the entrepreneur to decide whether or not they're more passionate about the problem or the customer. So that's one piece of advice on that. The second piece of advice is if you're like me, in the case where you are more passionate about the problem rather than the customer, then my recommendation is to go wide, narrow, and then wide. So what I mean by that is, at the start, you want to start with a wide net. So you want to try and see which customers are probably your ideal customers. And what I mean by that is then when you're going out, you're testing who can convert most easily, who feels the problem the most, who you're most excited to work with, who is an easy customer to work with, and who has the largest market potential. So you're looking at the market segments, what's the market size, what's the market potential. So you're casting the net wide to try to figure out who is the right customer. And once you find the good niche, the right niche, you actually want to zone in and focus on that niche. Carve out your niche, because every successful company, if you look at the history of capitalization, most companies, they all start by having a good and strong focus. For example, Amazon, they started with books. They catered towards people who were readers, and then they started to expand to different markets, started to carry different products to different people as well. So almost every company, even Apple as well, really starts with one product, one niche, and then you start to expand. So in essence, to kind of sum that up, decide who you want to pivot on, whether you're focused on being grounded in problem or customer. And then when it comes to casting the net, start wide and then go narrow, focus on a niche, and then you can start to diversify once you have built a strong reputation and base around your niche. The second question that came up was, what is the best use of funds for customer acquisition in the retail space? So I don't think I have a good answer for that because the answer is it depends, like many things. To be a bit generic in my answer, I would say my piece of advice there is solve top of funnel problems first before trying to optimize for conversion. So what I mean by that is if you're going to spend money anywhere in the sales funnel or in the sales process, you want to focus on getting customers first, because it doesn't matter if you optimize the best email drip campaign or if you have a great layout for your store to get people to convert, but if no one is walking into your store in your retail space, or if you're an online business, if no one is coming to your landing pages, if no one is clicking on your ads, it doesn't matter how good you are at converting them, right? So focus on top of funnel problems first. Channels will also depend on your solution, right? So if you say, oh, I have a retail store, should I advertise in print? Should I advertise on Facebook? Should I advertise on LinkedIn? It really depends on what products you're carrying, what your solution is. Not everyone needs to be on Facebook. Not everyone needs to be on LinkedIn. So a lot of entrepreneurs will think, hey, I'm starting a business, I should be on every single platform. That's not the right answer. I think it really depends on what products you have and who your customers are and where they kind of consume and look for these type of products. So if you're really struggling and the answer doesn't kind of clarify, then my advice is to go out and mystery shop your closest competitor. So find a company that's selling a similar product and see how they get customers. mystery shop them. You could cold call them. You could walk into the store, kind of try to figure out how they're getting you as a customer, and see if you can apply the same strategy to your business. Great. So I'm just going to quickly read out some more comments in the chat. Simon is saying, I am a web developer, just interested in perspective from people in sales. Thanks for introducing yourself, Simon. Thanks, Maybelle. Great. So moving on to the presentation, maybe let's talk about the first thing, which is sales versus marketing. When it comes to sales versus marketing, I think the biggest challenge is a lot of people tend to see it as a dichotomy, as two different things. But sales and marketing are really one and the same. So the challenge is a lot of people struggle with defining where marketing ends and where sales begins. I don't think that there is actually a line to draw where it ends and where it begins. It's really both one and the same. Some marketing people are doing some functions of sales, and some salespeople are actually doing marketing as well. So especially in the early days, if you are starting a company, or even if you are part of a company that is a bit larger and has a dedicated sales team and a dedicated marketing team, I strongly encourage sales and marketing people to work together, because a lot of things are not very effective when you separate the teams. For example, if you have a sales team and you have your marketing team separate, and your marketing team is running certain ad campaigns and they're on Facebook and they're starting to put out some content, and your salespeople are noticing that they're struggling to convert some of the leads, it's really hard to do that analysis and figure out why is that the case. Is it because the salespeople are not using the right techniques? Or is it because some of these leads are not the right leads? They're not qualified leads. They're actually the wrong demographic or the wrong type of customer, right? So if you have sales and marketing working together, then it's a bit easier to collaborate, to figure out and kind of pinpoint some of the causes behind some of these experiments that you see. The other thing as well, so on the flip side is also very true, when you're working with salespeople, and let's say salespeople find that they are, so I'll give you one specific example. So when I was working with Spring, I was trying to figure out what was the best qualifier to determine if someone was ready to buy. So in sales, this term is called Sales Qualified Lead, SQL. So what that means is basically when someone displays a certain behavior, they're usually ready for a sales conversation. So an example of that is if someone visits your pricing page, then they're probably ready to start to buy a product. You want to start engaging with them with salespeople. You want to probably try to call them up, email them, have some sort of demo with them to try to convert them, because that's buying behavior, right? So in Spring, I was trying to figure out what is this SQL behavior. And had I been working separately for marketing, it would have been really difficult for me to kind of determine that. But the benefit for me was I was working for a very small team. So I was actually doing a lot of the marketing myself as well. And one of the things I noticed was that usually most of our customers who convert into our programs, they usually attend 3 or more of our events. So I use that as a trigger, and I set my CRM, and I'll talk about CRMs later, but basically I set it up so that when people attend at least 3 events, I get a notification. I say, hey, this person has, I get an email in my inbox because it tells me, Kenny has attended 3 of my workshops. And then I'll reach out to Kenny and I'll say something like, hey, Kenny, I noticed you've been for a few of my workshops. Are you running a business? Are you looking for support? And then I'll have some sort of conversation with them and try to convert them into a program. So that's kind of what I mean by having sales and marketing working together. And then we can talk about sales qualified leads later as well. Kenny's saying, true, we are not in any social media because we are always getting unnecessary questions about how to run the sport by marketing firms, and they will take our suggestion to run it on their own. Yeah, I think definitely quite true. So it really just depends. You don't have to be everywhere. If your customers are not on there, but you're just working with marketing firms indirectly because they are the ones that are serving the sport itself, then yeah, you don't have to be on social media. So the way I like to see sales is everything. Sales is not only selling your product. If you are looking for a job, sales is selling yourself. If you are pitching to investors, you are selling your vision. You're selling the promise of how you will help them make their money in return. If you're marketing, you're technically in sales as well. You're selling your brand, you're selling your product itself. Or if you are in HR or recruitment, you are selling the culture of the company. So I think it's one of the most essential skills when it comes to entrepreneurship, because every founder, if no one in the company is selling, you are the one that's selling, right? So everyone pretty much has to be involved in sales at some point. So maybe let's quickly have a quick overview of how sales has evolved over the last few years and what has changed. How has the line between marketing and sales blurred as well? So back in the days, sales really used to be all focused on skills and the person's ability to convince and manipulate someone into actually converting into a customer. A lot of it was really dependent on luck as well, because people would do cold calling, they would go door to door. But as you can see over time, a lot of the luck has been replaced by, and the techniques have been replaced by tools, automation, processes. So technology has made a lot more things possible. Now, most customers, by the time you're speaking to them, they've already done their research online. They already know who some of the other competitors are. So what you're actually seeing is there's this big difference where in the old approach, it took a lot of time for salespeople to actually qualify a customer. And then once a customer is qualified, salespeople will have to spend a lot of time with the customer to convert them as well. So it takes, the whole process takes a lot longer. And in terms of marketing resources, it's fairly minimal. In the olden days, it used to be more focused around print ads. It's just to get your brand noticed. And then after that, salespeople do all the heavy lifting to convert the customer. Now it's actually more content heavy. It's more marketing focused on the front end. And then sales just does the tail end where you're converting customers. There are some pros and cons, of course. The good thing about the new approach is you actually get a lot more prospects. The addressable market is much larger, but you're also, you have to be mindful that you're also competing with a lot more companies now as well. So you really win or lose on the front end, right? Depending on how well you set up your marketing funnels to begin with, how you attract customers, how you nurture them, how you qualify them, that really determines if you're speaking to the right people, and that will really help your salespeople win. So if customers are finding out about products and solutions before they even reach out to you, if they're looking at competitors, and if you're not doing any thought leadership, if you're not building any content, then you are really losing out because you don't see a lot of opportunities still there later in the funnel. So you are being kind of swamped out by your competitors, and your idea is you kind of have to be in the content marketing game at some point as well. So I won't talk too much about marketing, but just bear in mind that marketing is really, really important in sales of today as well. So let's touch on inbound versus outbound. So inbound, in essence, and outbound, most people think of inbound as marketing and outbound as sales, but it's actually quite a bit of a blend. Sorry, I just saw a link from the top salespeople can always take negative responses from potential customers into positive opportunities. Yes, definitely. So I'll talk a bit about how to, actually maybe I'll quickly address that now. So when it comes to objections, the best objection or the best way to handle an objection is to actually address it before it comes up. So if you are in marketing, you probably heard of the term copywriting. Some people in sales might not have heard of it, but basically good copy is going to address objections even before they arise. So for example, if you have a website and your website, if you know that a common objection that your customer frequently gets is, what do I do if the product is faulty and I need to return it? And if you address that on the website before someone even has to speak to a sales rep, that will not be an objection that arises. People won't say, oh, I'm not sure, I don't want to buy it yet because I'm not sure if it, something will go wrong, right? If you address that on the website early and you actually say, hey, this is our return policy, we have a guarantee, we will even handle free shipping or whatever it is, then you're addressing the objection before it arises. It won't actually come up in the sales conversation because it's already been addressed, right? So that's one way of addressing an objection. Another thing around objection is, quick tip or hack is, this is the one part in the entire sales process where it's a safe area for you to make an assumption. So what I mean by that is, usually in sales, you never want to make an assumption because you don't know what the customer really needs. So if you actually tell a customer, hey, you know what, I think this is great for you, and you've made an assumption, you might be wrong. So you could actually ruin the relationship. You could jeopardize the trust. But when there's an objection, you could actually say, hey, are you not sure because you think it's too expensive? If the customer actually doesn't, if price is not actually the original objection, they will clarify. They'll say, actually, you know what, it's not too expensive, but I just need to speak to my spouse first, or whatever it is. So they'll tell you what the objection is, and that helps you uncover the objection, and then you can try to address that. So definitely, salespeople can take a negative response and kind of spin it into something positive. And at the end of the day, it's not about manipulation. It's really about finding fit. So my best advice there is, especially if you feel uncomfortable with this process of dealing with objections. I know sometimes it feels like, you know, someone's saying no, but you're still trying to push them. Don't see it as pushing them. Your goal is you're trying to leave your prospect better than when you found them, even if they don't buy your product. So if you're a good salesperson, your focus is you want to really help the customer, you want to educate the customer, you want to really show them what are the options, what the alternatives are. And of course, if you're working for a company, your solution has some sort of advantage over what else is out there, right? If you don't, then you're really stretching yourself thin when it comes to trying to kind of highlight how you're different. But if you are different in some way, then there is a good reason why a customer actually wants to be with you. So it's really about showing them what the value is, educating them, helping them, and it's not about pushing them to buy. So I hope that makes you a bit more comfortable if you really think that, you know, dealing with objections is a challenging thing. Another thing to remember is when people say no, you're not just asking them the same question over and over again, expecting the same answer, right? That's kind of the definition of insanity. Your goal is when you have an objection, you're trying to come about it with a different approach. So I'll give you an example. So back when I used to work in telecommunications, when we were selling phones, one of the things that we had to do is we had to upsell. So when you do an upsell, that's basically you're trying to get someone to buy a more expensive phone. Or we sometimes do cross-selling. So you might say, oh, buying accessories, buying, you know, insurance package for your phone if you damage your phone, or buying like a protective cover or screen protector, things like that. So oftentimes, a lot of bad salespeople, they find that when they lay some of these cross-sell products on the table, they get rejected. But when you deal with objections, like I mentioned, you want to plant the seed early. So your goal is to try to raise it as early as possible. And you raise it in different ways. So for example, how I would do it is I would say, hey, you know, I see you're interested in iPhone 5. I actually have some really great, you know, protectors and cases for it. But let's quickly take a look at the cell phone plans first, just to make sure that you're set up with the right package that you need. And then later on in sales, I might bring that up again and I say, hey, you know what, I mentioned some cases and protectors earlier in the conversation. Here's a few. Why don't you take a look and let me know if you like any of them? And then if later on, if they don't actually decide to buy any of them, then I might actually come back to them and say, you know what, right now we have a discount on this bundle. If you get these selected products, then you get a discount. So if you notice, I'm not actually just saying, hey, do you want to buy it? No. Why don't you want to buy it? I'm not being pushy, right? I'm actually trying to approach it in different ways. Yeah. So yeah, Ling is just commenting, I agree, do not take no as the final answer. So yes, definitely no is typically not the final answer. There are other ways around the no, but if you know that the customer is actually not a fit, then that's where I encourage you to actually stop, right? If you know that the customer is not a fit for a product or solution, then don't push it. But if you know that the customer is a fit and that your product will really add value to them, then it's not about pushing them to say yes, but it's really about showing them and helping them see why it is the case. So I hope that makes you feel a bit more comfortable. Cool. So back to the topic. So inbound versus outbound. So I was mentioning inbound is typically seen as marketing and outbound as sales, but it's a bit of both. So to kind of really define it, inbound is when a customer finds you. So it can be through sales. It can also be through marketing. Typically, it's marketing because it's usually incoming inquiries, you know, ads, copywriting that brings the customers to you. But it also could be through sales. So if you're doing things like demos, if you're running workshops, that's also part of inbound and also partly sales as well. Outbound, on the other hand, you're reaching out to people. So that's where you're doing things like prospecting, you're doing list building. That might be through cold calling, maybe you're doing email outreach, and I'll show you how to do some of that in a bit. But the idea is you're actually going out, you're attending events, you're actually going to try to find where the customers are. Another thing to know in terms of sales terminology is if you're not familiar with push versus pull, that's another way to view how you interact with the customer. So an example of push versus pull, let's look at marketing. So if you have push advertisements, these are ads that are interruptive in nature. You're trying to get in front of the customer and interrupt their intention to get them to look at you, right? So ads are by default push. Pull, on the other hand, is like content. So if you write blogs, if you run workshops, if you do webinars, that's pull, where you're basically trying to get people to come to you more naturally. So that's another thing to think about when you're considering how you want to interact with the customer. I think every business needs to have a combination of both push and pull, but also inbound and outbound. what you will find though is it also depends on your product or solution. So what I mean by that is if you are more consumer oriented, or if you have products that are valued under, I would say, $1,000, you will likely be more marketing heavy. So when I say marketing heavy, I would estimate more like 80 to 90% of your efforts will be more marketing centric. Your salespeople would be more like customer success agents. So they're a bit of customer service, but also sales, more like account managers, right? And why is that the case is because the unit economics simply don't work out to have a sales team if your products are less than $1,000 or if you're more consumer centric. Consumer centric, cost of acquisition is usually much lower. You're usually more focused on volume, and the price of your product, if you're less than 1,000, it simply doesn't make sense for your sales reps, for you to hire salespeople to actually get in front of a lot of customers. Because sales itself is by nature a bit more time consuming than marketing, and the cost of acquiring customer through sales is more expensive. On the other hand, if you're B2B, if you're selling products that are over $1,000, then it's a bit easier for you to be more sales heavy, and you'll likely see that you're more on the 70-80% sales oriented and less on the marketing side of things. So let's quickly take a look at some key sort of concepts and also common mistakes that a lot of startups make. So number one is defining the user versus the customer. I see a lot of people make this mistake, and I've made this mistake myself. The first company I started back in 2011 was a mobile app development company. We were building apps for I would say for restaurants. The idea was basically it's an app that ranks dishes. So imagine if you go on an app right now, usually most apps will tell you where to go for good food, right? You might search, I'm looking for the best Italian place around me, and then Yelp will give you a list of restaurants. But when you get to the restaurant, you don't really know what to order. So we were building an app that would help rank the dishes in a restaurant. Imagine like Reddit, where you can upvote and downvote dishes. And the most popular dishes would get upvoted most. So if you're in this ramen place, you won't accidentally order something else just because you can't read the menu or just because you don't know what's the best dish. So still sounds like a great idea, but we as a team at the time, we really focused too much on the user. So the user was the general consumer, but we were trying to monetize true restaurants. So the restaurants were the consumer. So in some cases, your user and your customer are one and the same. But if they are different, you have to make sure that your product or your solution is actually also solving a problem for the user, for the customer, not only the user. So we couldn't actually build that business up. We struggled to monetize. We built the app, launched it. We got a bunch of users on it, but restaurants simply wouldn't pay us for it. So we couldn't go anywhere with that. So be aware of that. Make sure that your solution is actually solving for your customer as well. The second thing is also understand the difference between the user, the gatekeeper, the decision maker, and the buyer. So again, in some cases, they can all be one and the same, but in many cases, they might be different as well. So even if you're doing a product that really looks like it's for one single person. So the person on the left over there, his name is Andre, and we worked with him back in 2015 at Spring. And he was building this special bracelet for girls. And the idea was that a lot of girls, when they go out for parties, when they go out for parties, they are worried about getting spiked. So there are people who would put roofies into their drinks, spike them, get them drunk, get them drowsy, bring them home, and sexually harass them, right? And the idea is this bracelet would actually help detect some of these chemicals. So you would actually be able to dip the bracelet in the water, and it will change color if it notices any of these chemicals. And it seems very straightforward, single user, single customer. But actually what he found was the decision maker behind it and the kind of advocate for it was the parents of these teenage girls. So maybe the girls themselves, they might buy it, so they do care about the design of it. But usually the ones who flag this to their attention would be the parents. So he noticed that he had to change a lot of the language around his marketing campaigns to really target the parents, but also have the product designed in such a way where the user actually found it appealing to wear it. Make sense? Another great example here is the one on the right, where it comes from, there's this company here in Vancouver known as Life Booster. So Brian, he came to one of our fundraising programs in 2016 or 17. And his product was basically it started as a safety vest that miners can wear. So basically, if you're working in a mine, you might be lifting up heavy equipment or items, and you are worried about injuring your back. So the idea is that the vest would actually detect if you're in a bad position, and it will notify you. And when he started, he did a lot of interviews with the mining workers, and he got a lot of good feedback around the design of the product, around things like, oh, you actually can't send it to a phone because we are not allowed to carry phones in a mining work site. We have special like walkie-talkies or kind of company assigned devices. So he designed the vest to actually communicate with those devices instead of mobile phones. And then he actually found out that while miners were the users, the decision makers were actually the union. So he had to go and speak to mining unions. And then he found that, okay, mining unions, they really like the product, but actually the buyer is actually the corporation itself. So he has to go up to the C-level, speak to operations directors, and then there's also the gatekeepers. So gatekeepers would be like the finance department or even the tech department, right? So the idea is you want to really map it out so you know who you need to be speaking to and how you adjust your language depending on who you're speaking to. So again, could all be one and the same, it could all be different, but the idea is just to be aware of it. I am quickly going to take a peek at Facebook just to see if there are any questions. Nope. Great. Moving back. So maybe I'll take a quick pause here. Any questions or comments around user versus customer, or the idea of the user, the gatekeeper, decision maker, and buyer? Again, fastest way for you to make a comment or question is to actually just come off mute to chat. It might take you a while to type it out. Maybelle, do you balance marketing efforts between gatekeepers and buyers? Good question. I would say you actually spend more time on buyers. You just need to know who the gatekeepers are and how you need to speak to them. So gatekeepers are not usually heavily involved. So for example, if you're selling a software tool, sometimes the gatekeeper is usually finance department, legal department, or the tech department. The tech department will look at, like, does it work with our existing tech stack? Is it a security issue? And then legal department wants to make sure that everything is outlined, there are no liabilities working with you. And then finance, does it fit within our budget? But if you design your product the right way, you can kind of get around some of these things. So what I mean by that is, so I'll give you one example of another company we work with. So there's this company, they're called Royal Health. I think they've already shut down, but they were selling this software to hospitals in the US. And what they were doing is a lot of universities, when they have students, they need to have their students work and intern with some of the doctors to learn, right? But the challenge is many hospitals don't have a good system to track the students that are coming in, which doctors they are assigned to, and kind of track the progress of their internship. So the idea of that is his platform will actually solve all of that. He would actually help facilitate connection between the university students and the hospitals. And when he started out, he would actually have this big package that he would sell. And he found that the sales process into hospitals was very bureaucratic and very lengthy. His sales cycle was usually about a year. It takes him about a year of conversations with the right directors in the hospital, getting the legal department to approve it, getting the tech department to approve it, and then finally they would actually purchase the product. And when I looked at his sales cycle, I said, hey, 1 year of a sales cycle is too long. Most sales cycles should be under 3 months. So I asked him to go out and do some mystery shopping. And actually, there was another competitor that was selling a similar product also to hospitals. I said, hey, why don't you see how that competitor actually sells to hospitals? And he actually found out that what his competitor was doing is they did it very differently. They didn't try to onboard a bunch of users at a go. They didn't charge a very expensive contract. What they would do is they would offer the product for free to the doctors, get doctors to test it out on trial. And then after the doctors had a certain limit of interns, then they would switch on the pay gate. So it might be like you have 5 free interns, and after 5 interns, you start to pay for the product. So the way he did that facilitated the use. So people actually started to use it. They saw the value, and that made the doctors the advocates. So the doctors would go up and advocate the model to the hospital directors. He didn't have to do all of that outreach himself. And then because there wasn't a big contract to sign up front, it wasn't getting people to sign a contract or proposal for the competitors. They were getting people to use it. There were terms and conditions instead. So all the legal department has to do then is they're actually not a gatekeeper now. They just have to review, just make sure that the terms and conditions apply. And in most cases, they didn't even bother reviewing some of the details of the terms and conditions. But if you actually get someone to sign a contract upfront, there's a lot of hesitancy around committing to a contract because people worry about the legal implications of it. So if you can try to leave out the gatekeepers, that's what you're trying to do in essence. So sorry, that's a bit of a long answer. Decision makers, not buyers. Then yeah, same thing. I mean, the end goal is the main target is really the decision maker. Yeah. Cool. Hope that answers that. Right. If no other questions, comments, I'll move on. Oh, sorry. Ling is asking, what's the difference in dealing with user versus customer? So again, it really depends on who the user is and who the customer is. So back to Andrew's example, the user are the teenage girls that are going out to parties. So in that case, the language, the copy that he's using to describe. So when I use the word copy here, copy doesn't only refer to marketing copy. It doesn't only refer to what you say in the ads or what you say on your website. Marketing also refers to what you say verbally to copy also refers to what you say verbally to your customers. So it can be your call script or your sales conversation script. So when you're talking to people about the product, how are you describing it? So what values do you appeal to? What benefits do you highlight? They might be different for the user versus customer if they are different. So for example, when you're speaking in Andre's case to the parents, it's more focused around safety. It's more focused around keeping your children safe, right? It's more about prevention rather than dealing with the aftermath of it. When he's speaking to the teenage girls, it's more about, hey, it's stylish, but it also protects you as well. It's more about independence and freedom, right? So the kind of values, the words that they're using are slightly different. So they might seem like really nuanced differences, but it makes a big difference when it comes to converting customers. Does that answer the question? Great. So just to give another example here is, I talked earlier about sales CRMs, and I'll lightly touch on it at the end when I talk about tools. But a sales CRM is basically a system where it allows you to track all of your leads or your prospects. So if you're not familiar with what leads and prospects are, basically these are all the people who could potentially become your customers in the future. So you want to track where they are in terms of the conversion process, so you know what you need to do with them. So for example, if someone has only been in your store once versus if someone is a returning customer, you might interact with them differently. So the sales CRM is a tool that allows you to track where in the funnel this person is. So usually to implement a sales CRM, it's actually quite a big decision for many organizations. Or if you want to get them to switch from an existing CRM, it's a really big decision as well. Because CRM tools are usually very tightly integrated with many things in your organization. It's integrated with your marketing stack. It's integrated with your website, with your email, with your drip campaigns. It's integrated with sales, your sales team. It's integrated with your calendar booking systems. It's integrated with your note-taking system. So it's usually very tied into the entire organization. It's possibly even integrated with finance as well, because it's processing payments and things like that. So if you think about it, CRM, the main user is usually the sales reps, but the advocates are usually the managers, because managers want to be able to track the progress of the sales reps and also use it to coach and improve sales performance for their reps. But the decision maker, like I mentioned, could be finance because of budget, could be IT because of integration, and then the buyer could be the VP of sales or the CEO. So sometimes they could be all different, but in some cases it could all be the same as well. So just want to make sure that you're aware of that. So when it comes to mapping out user, decision maker, gatekeeper, buyer, things like this, how you want to approach it is usually there are common patterns among customers. So what I mean by that is when you define your ideal customer, typically the main differences depend on the stage of the company. So what I mean by that is if you have a small company as your target customer and they have less than 50 employees, they will have a very different purchasing decision as opposed to a medium company that has, let's say, 250 to maybe 500 employees, or a large company that has over 1,000 employees. So the decision-making process is different. So your goal is to try to figure out what the process is and how to map that out. So what you want to do is you want to start speaking to some customers, track some of these things, and maybe I can quickly show you what a prospect tracking map will look like. Let me just switch my screens just to put that up. Actually, I think you can see it from here. So you usually only need to do this at the very start if you don't know what the process is. But once you know what the process is, it's a lot easier for you, and you probably don't need to use it as much as well. No, that's not it. Great. So what this looks like is when you're reaching out to people, you're tracking who you're reaching out to. So you might be tracking the user, you might be tracking advocate, the approver, the decision maker. So approver is also the gatekeeper. And you're tracking your outreach. So for example, you might send an email, first email to all of them. You might send email number 2, which is a follow-up email to all of them again. And you want to see like who's actually responding. So you might notice that over here, maybe the advocate actually says no on the first response, but you find that, oh, decision makers say yes to the first email, they're interested in learning more, and then they forward you to someone else. So the idea is just to kind of map out what the path of sales is, so you know who you need to speak to, who responds to what, so that you can more quickly convert them in the future. If you're interested in a template, I can share that out. Just send me an email and I can share it out with you privately. So back to the topic of thinking about the user versus customer. This is a great concept that I learned from one of the mentors at Spring. So Mike Winterfield used to be the VP of Operations at Traction on Demand. Traction on Demand is a Vancouver-based Salesforce implementation company. So they help companies implementing Salesforce, which is a CRM tool. And like I mentioned, Salesforce or implementing any CRM is a really big decision for a lot of companies. So it's really hard to get companies to convert. It's really, really expensive. Yeah, typical average project size, I think, is usually about at least 100 grand. So they're selling pretty expensive products. And one thing that he coached me on is there's this concept known as the thin edge of the wedge. So what he means by that is when people are deciding if they want to make a change or purchase a new product, there's this concept known as the decision threshold. And what it means is there is usually 2 things that they're weighing. So they're weighing the cost of changing versus the cost of staying the same. So the cost of changing might include what is the price of your product? How long do I need to transition from my old solution to this new solution? What is the onboarding process? Do I need to train my employees? How do I convince them to change behavior and use the new product? So all of this is accounted into the cost of changing. Cost of staying the same is what is the lost opportunity, or what is the cost right now? What's the risk? Or maybe, for example, if the government is saying, oh, you need to do this now, you need to be GDPR compliant by this date or else you get a fine. So are there specific costs associated with that? So what is the cost of staying versus cost of changing? And the idea is people will make a decision to change if they can see that the cost of staying the same outweighs the cost of changing. Make sense? So again, I'll repeat that. Basically, they will be ready to change if they know that they're losing more money by staying the same rather than the money that they're spending to actually change. So then the idea here is when you speak about the thin edge of the wedge is you actually want to lighten the load of the cost of changing. So it becomes more apparent that there's a higher risk to actually stay the same. So an example here is with Mike and his company, what they would do is they would actually, instead of coming in and say, hey, we will help you implement Salesforce, they would actually say, hey, we know that you're considering changing CRM tools because your company has outgrown your existing solution. We come in and we do an audit for you. The audit is only $5,000. It's a lot cheaper. And we help you find all the different CRM solutions out there. and we give you a comprehensive report on how to implement them and what some of the pros and cons are. And then it's up to you after that to decide if you want to implement it, or if you want to use us, or if you want to go with Salesforce or whatever it is. So this report that they would create would actually be valuable in and of itself. It's not just a simple assessment. It actually shows them, and from the report, they can actually make a decision on which solution they want to go with. And maybe even if they want to, they can decide to use Salesforce on their own without the help of Traction on Demand as well. But once they actually sold the report, they noticed that the conversion was much, much higher. They were actually converting 80% of the people who actually opted to get the report from them. So that's the idea. You want to figure out what is the thin edge of the wedge that you can offer to get through the door. And sometimes it's selling a smaller version of your solution. Sometimes it might be even tweaking your product or solution itself. So for example, if you have a software as a solution product, if you're a tech company, it might be having some sort of freemium, or maybe it's some sort of trial period where people can use a certain amount. So the idea is, how can you get them to more easily say yes, try out, use your product, and then convert them after. So I hope that helps you kind of understand this concept. Sales process. So I'm going to kind of speed through some of these things. It's not as complicated as you think it is. So in a nutshell, all you're trying to go after is, number one, define your customer persona. So I think Ling is quite familiar with this. You want to know who and why they're buying. Once you know who your customers are, you start to build your funnel. So you want to know how you're converting them, each stage. And then once you know how you're converting them, then all you have to do is you have to fill the funnel. So you have to fill the top of funnel. You have to do acquisition. You have to figure out what channels are the right channels. And then as you put people through the funnel, you need to convert them. So that's where the sales script comes into play. And sales script is not only a verbal script, but it can also be the words that you use, like I mentioned, the copy you use on your website, your email drip campaigns, all of these different things that help you convert the customer. So how do you greet them? How do you assess them? How do you inform or pitch your solution? How do you close? So that's the discussion phase. How do you close them, overcome objections? And then account management at the tail end of it. How do you make sure that they have a good experience, upselling, cross-selling, retaining your customers, things like that. So let's talk a bit about funnel. So the funnel, I think this is one concept that I really wish I knew when I was in corporate. So interestingly, when I was in corporate sales, they actually did not teach us about the funnel. They taught us a lot more about the techniques. But I think knowing the funnel really helps you design experiments that help you optimize not only the process, but also your techniques as well. So an example here is, if you are doing cold calling as a way to convert your customers, then that might be the number of phone calls that you make that result in appointments. And the number of appointments that result in actual pitches, number of proposals that go out, number of closes, right? So the idea is usually the funnel, there is some leakage and there are less and less people at the bottom, less people will convert. If you're email marketing, it might be the number of emails you sent, number of emails that get open, number of clicks that happen, and the number of people actually go to your landing page and sign up, and the number of people who buy your product. So that's another example of a funnel. If you're in retail, because I think someone mentioned retail, the good way of thinking of it is number of people who walk in front of your store, number of people who stop in front of your store, number of people who actually look at a poster in your store, number of people who walk into the store, number of people who interact with a product, number of people who speak to a sales rep, and the number of people who convert, right? So the idea is to actually know some of these stages so you can start to optimize. Because if you're saying, hey, you know what, my sales reps in my location are not converting any customers, simply is not working out, maybe your sales reps are just not having enough volume to deal with. Maybe there's just simply not enough people coming in front of their location, stopping, and actually walking into the store. So then you actually need to figure out how you can get the attention of people. Maybe it's changing your display, your signage. Maybe it's displaying visual merchandising. How do you actually showcase your products out front and center so that people are interested in coming in, right? So the idea is to actually understand some of these stages so that you can try to convert them. Sorry, I'm just quickly reading the chat. Yeah, no worries, Bob. The session is recorded, so send me a message after if you need the recording as well. Cool. So because we're looking at a funnel and because there's leakage, when you're looking at the funnel, there's two things you want to pay attention to. So number one is as you look at leakage, you want to try to figure out how you can capture some of the leakage and put them back into the funnel. So for example, if you're calling 45 people and you're noticing that only 34 of them result in appointments, how can you get some of the people who don't book appointments to rebook an appointment? So then that might be a follow-up email, right? So if you have a follow-up email, maybe more of them will book a follow-up appointment. So that's where you're actually reducing some of that funnel leak. And then the second thing is when you look at some of those stages, it also allows you to figure out how you can optimize to figure out where your bottlenecks are. So two things you look at when you're optimizing bottlenecks. So one is conversion numbers. So if you see that, let's say a lot of people are, you're calling a lot of people, but very few people are actually getting proposals. Then maybe the challenge is maybe between the pitch and the proposal. Then maybe the issue or the area to focus on improving is, it's not so much about the call and appointments, but about how you pitch when you actually have that follow-on demo session, right? So maybe they're saying the wrong things when they're pitching. Maybe they're not asking for a proposal after that or whatever it is. So the idea is look at the conversion rate to see where to focus. And then the second thing is also look at the cycle, the sales cycle or time between each of the stages. If you're noticing that it takes too long to get from phone calls to appointments, then there might be something wrong there as well. And that's where you can kind of optimize it as well. Cool. Other ideas around retargeting. So for example, let's say if you have an online company or online sales, sometimes you notice, like if you visit certain companies' websites, you start to notice that you see the ads all over the place. That's because they are doing retargeting. So they have cookies enabled and they know that you visited their website because they're tracking you, and they actually start to serve you ads on different places like Facebook and Google and things like that, right? So that's just another example of retargeting. Cool. So last thing I'll probably talk about on the buyer's journey is this process around, instead of thinking about a process-driven funnel, which is what we've been talking about, which is, you know, what does someone do? They walk in the store, they touch your product, they speak to your rep. There's a process-driven funnel. If you're a startup in the early stages and you don't know what the right method to convert a customer is, then I encourage you to actually build a buyer's journey funnel. So why I'm saying this is because sometimes, in some cases, maybe to buy a product or solution, someone visits your website. Maybe sometimes it's because your rep goes out, meets them at an event. Maybe sometimes it's because you do cold calling. So the ways to convert customers might be slightly different. There might be multiple channels as well. And in most cases, there are multiple channels. Then I think a process-driven funnel usually doesn't help as much if your sales reps need to be involved in multiple channels. So the buyer's journey funnel, I'll walk you through it. So what you're doing is it's based around HubSpot's framework and design on awareness, consideration, decision, and close. So these stages, what they mean is in the awareness stage, awareness is not awareness of your product or solution. Awareness is getting the customer to first become aware that they have a problem. Once they're aware that they have a problem, the next step that they will take is they will start to look for solutions. So the consideration stage here is that consideration of solutions. They're not considering you as a solution yet, but they're just considering different solutions. And then the decision stage is where you come into the picture, where you are being actively considered as the solution. So why I think this is important is because, like I mentioned, sales and marketing go hand in hand. And when you map the buyer's journey out this way, what you'll notice is there is this concept known as gradualization. I'll talk about it in the next slide. But basically, as a customer goes through the decision-making process to use a new solution, they first need to be aware that they have a problem. They're aware that they're looking for a solution. They're sorting out all the different options. They're comparing solutions. They're looking at price points, budget, things like that. And then they're ready to buy. So this is an example of gradualization. So first, let's say if you're, in this example here, it actually came from Matt Estefan. So Matt Estefan is an internet marketing guru. He actually runs a meetup here in Vancouver. And when he launched his social media training program, what he would do is he would sell to people who were doing some form of sales. And it's mostly about helping them understand that social media is an option to convert customers. How do you do social selling? So here, the first step in terms of the realization process is customers first need to believe that what they're doing right now is not working, that they're actually missing a lot of opportunities, right? And then they need to believe that there's a better way of getting leads and making sales. Then once they believe that, they need to believe that they can make 7 figures a year without prospecting. And once they believe that there are better options, they need to believe that social media is the best option for them. And then once they believe that social media is the best option, then they're at the decision stage. You need to believe that this specific social media product is what will get them results faster and easier than any other solution. And then lastly, to wrap them up and close them, they need to believe that they need the product now. So if you map it out this way, what your funnel will look like then is basically you have prospects, inquiries. So inquiries are people who are becoming aware, consideration, decision, and then you have close. So close won, close lost, or parking lot. And parking lot is basically for people who are, maybe they might say, hey, you know what, this is not the right time. We don't have the right budget right now. We typically make fiscal decisions on this type of purchases, in Q3 or whatever it is. But the idea is you're mapping people based on where they are in the funnel. So then it's a bit more useful for a startup because you're doing everything you can to move someone to the next stage of the funnel. And it really doesn't depend on the process. So for example, if I have someone who's in the awareness stage, then what I might do is I might send them some articles because some of these articles might be relevant for helping them understand different ways to solve some of the problems and kind of move them into the consideration stage. Or if not an article, maybe I might run a workshop. So running a workshop to help them understand, hey, if you have this problem in marketing, these are some of the ways that you can solve it. I hope that helps you understand. So maybe I'll give you another example. So HubSpot, another CRM tool, HubSpot, for them, how their funnel looks like is people in the consideration stage are people who don't really understand what inbound marketing is. So then basically what they would do is they would create content, they would run workshops that will help people understand what is inbound marketing. So that's their topic for prospects. And then for inquiries, consideration, so consideration is more like, now I know what inbound marketing is, but I don't really know what the different solutions are. So for example, inbound marketing includes email marketing, it includes landing page design, it includes content marketing. So then, for example, they might focus on, let's say, email marketing. So they might say, hey, what are some different email marketing tools out there? What are some of the pros and cons? Like, if you're comparing MailChimp versus ActiveCampaign versus, Mixpanel or something else. So the idea is you're showing some of the different solutions. And then decision then is more like, okay, now that you've decided to use HubSpot, what are some of your considerations? So it might be things like budget. It might be things like, how do you integrate HubSpot with your sales channel? How do you integrate HubSpot with your Gmail account so that you can actually track all of your emails? So the idea there is you're helping people move to the next step. And the ways that you help, you're a bit more open-ended with that. It might be through a workshop, it might be through different things. I hope that helps you understand that. I forgot to mention what exactly I meant by prospect. So a prospect is more on the outbound side. So prospect is more, maybe you think they're a fit for your program or your solution or your product, but they don't know it yet. So this is where you're a bit more proactive in the way that you're reaching out to them to actually show them, hey, you know what? Maybe you don't know this yet, but you could actually do this kind of things with this technology. Or many companies, they don't realize that they are missing out on some opportunities. Here are some opportunities that you can capture if you use our solution, right? So the idea is you actually do some active reach out. Prospects by default are unaware of the problem. So this is where challenger salespeople come in, and they're mostly helping people understand that they are missing out on something. And they're really helping the customer stand for being a better version of themselves instead of focusing on helping the customer instead of giving the customer what they think they need. So there is this other concept. So Miller-Heiman methodology is the one that actually Bob mentioned. Miller-Heiman methodology is more focused around needs-based selling. Needs-based selling is basically, the premise behind that is you don't pitch your product first. You always figure out what the customer needs first, so that when you pitch your product, you can position based on the customer's needs. So it's relevant, so that you're showing the customer, hey, you know what? I'm not just pitching you. I'm not just doing a cold sale here. I'm actually giving you what you need, right? So that's need-based selling. Challenger sales is more about, sometimes the customers don't even know what they need. So a challenger salesperson is the salesperson who is a lot more knowledgeable, a lot more knowledgeable than the customer about some techniques, some tricks, about some strategies that are relevant for the customer. And they're actually showing the customer how they can actually be a better version of themselves. So that's where there's a lot more education that's involved. I'm being a bit high level here, but I hope that just kind of gives you some insight. So if you're interested in reading more, there are books on that. So you can just let me know, and I can send some of the books to you as well. All right, I just want to make sure that I cover everything. So this is a link that you'll get when you actually have the slides. And I'll actually quickly open it up for you so you can kind of see how you can use the sales map. So I'm actually not going to go through the exercise. Log in. Oops. Ah. Oh my God, forgot my password. Oh. Let me use my personal account. There we go. Oh, give me a second. Let me see if I have a different copy. Sorry about the wait. I just want to quickly show you this map that you can use so you understand how to use it. So ready. Sorry, I'm just peeking at the Facebook comments. Someone's asking if it only applies to B2C. Actually, no. As all of you who are live have been hearing, it applies very strongly to B2B as well. Yes, so that's actually what I'm, so sorry, Ling is asking, is there a simple demonstration or example to put all this learning here together? I'm actually trying to pull that up. So that's actually in the template that I was talking about. Here we go. So I know I've given you a lot of information. This is the sales or marketing map that I've created as a template. Basically here on the columns, what you're seeing is the funnel based on the awareness, consideration, decision, and close. And then what you want to do is the notes page, the notes row is just a comment here, just so you know what the rows, what the columns are, just a reminder. But you start by actually mapping out what are some of the pain points at each of the stage, right? So for example, if you're in awareness stage, you might say, oh, I have a fever, sore throat, I ache all over. Consideration stage is I'm looking to find a cure that will work best for me. Decision stage is I want to find the best supplement that is most effective. And then decision stage is I need to start treatment immediately. I want to be confident if I made the right decision. So you want to know what pain points the customer is facing at each of those stages. And very closely related to that is what questions they're asking themselves at each of those stages. So typically these are what related questions if you're in the awareness stage. So like what could be causing fever, sore throat, body aches, right? What are the symptoms of the flu, right? Consideration is more how. So how do I treat a flu? How do I boost my immune system? And then decision stage is who is the best solution, right? It's usually more like what do I need to know when I'm considering nutritional supplements? How do I select the right supplement that is correct for me? How do different supplements compare against each other? And then the close stage is how much does it cost? What are the guarantees? How soon can I see results? So these are the questions. And then once you know what questions the customers are asking at each of the stages, then you can start to actually map out or create separate funnels. So these are what are the tools or channels that you're using. So the reason why I encourage you to use this type of funnel is because process funnels are very linear, but sometimes what will happen is a customer might read a blog and then they might actually, instead of watching a video, they might join a workshop. And then they might actually end up, maybe watching an infographic or jumping on a demo call. So sometimes the path is more like a map. It's not one straight path. Not everyone who, reads the email, will go on and read a blog, and from the blog, visit your website and then buy a product. Sometimes they might need a different process. And the idea is you want to create different tools and have different channels so that you can actually convert them through all of the tools. So here, tools and channels, for example, blogs, then because you know what questions people are asking, you know how you can make the right content that will actually speak to their questions. So for example, here you can see 5 signs that you're coming down with a flu, or cold versus flu. What are the symptoms? What's the difference? And then you can see how the content is different when you're in the consideration stage, right? You're saying like, how do you treat a flu without medication? Or what's the best medication for flu? How do you cure the flu quickly? And then if you're in the decision stage, then you're actually doing things like comparing different supplements together, helping, showing people how to actually make their own supplements or whatever it is. So the idea is the content that you create, the channels that you use are all different depending on the status. And if you map up the questions based on each of the stages, you can create more relevant content. Here, you can see there's a second row here. What this is sort of like, what's the word for it? I call them lead magnets. So lead magnets are basically things that you can give people in your content so that people take an action, so that you actually can qualify them. So for example, if you have this blog that says 5 signs that you're coming down with flu, if you don't have a call to action at the end, if you don't have a lead magnet, you don't know if someone is actually ready to convert. So a lead magnet could be a self-diagnosis tool. You could say, enter your email here, and you can actually get access to this tool where you can put in some of your symptoms and it will tell you what you have. So that by entering the email, you now know that the person has consumed this content and they are interested. Then you can move them to the next stage of the funnel. So that's a lead magnet. It could be a tool, it could be a downloadable recipe, it could be a guidebook, it could be like getting them to sign up for an event, whatever it is. And then call to actions at each stage are different as well. So a big problem that a lot of salespeople have is they tend to try to sell people in the first interaction. Sales is not a single transaction. Sales is multiple layers, right? You don't try to get someone to buy if they're not even ready to look at solutions yet. So if they're in the awareness stage, then usually the best call to action is read more, learn more. If they're in the consideration stage, then it's usually more about maybe you want to convert them with a lead magnet. You want to get them to download something. If they're in the decision stage, maybe it's like book a demo, read some of our testimonials, learn about a case study, something like that. And then if they're in the closing stage, then maybe it's like, buy now, order a sample, subscribe, whatever it is. So the idea is the call to actions are different depending on the status as well. And then another thing that you look at as well is requirements to advance. So this is important to map out because a lot of sales reps fail to capture the right information they need to move someone to the next stage. So an example here is often I find, especially cold calling, a lot of reps, what they would do is they call a bunch of people, and then after the call, they actually don't set or book the appointment for the follow-up conversation. And because of that, they get a lot of drop-off. They never hear back from the customer, or it takes a long time for them to book their next appointment. So if you know then that what you need to do is to move someone to that next stage, you need to get their phone number, you need to get their schedule, their date and time in order to actually book the next appointment, and you actually get it in the call, then you're actually much more likely to convert the customer right after that. So actually a recent interaction is I'm leasing a car, and my car lease is actually expiring in October. And I actually just got a call this week by Honda Richmond, and they were calling me and they're saying, hey, you know what? We noticed that your lease is coming up. Are you interested in checking out some new cars? We have some good deals right now. And then the sales rep actually said, hey, when do you want to come in and actually take a look? He actually pushed me to actually say, hey, can you look at your calendar? Are you available this weekend? What time? So he's actually doing some of that follow-up. So this is this exact behavior in action. So the idea is once you have that, then you can actually convert the customer more easily. Then you can use this to set targets if you want. So, what's the target? Maybe you want to get 150 new contacts every month. Maybe you want to have 200 marketing qualified leads. Maybe you want to have 100 leads, whatever it is. But the idea is once you map all of this out, then you can create a launch plan and you can decide what you need to create and how you can actually start convert people. Ooh, a lot here. Any comments, any questions before we move on? Great. So yeah, don't worry too much if you are struggling with that. I will send you the link so you'll have that to actually look through at your own time. But basically, you use it to map out your strategy. And that's the kind of sales strategy that if you're speaking to an investor and they're saying like, hey, what's your go-to-market strategy? What's your sales strategy? If you have a map like that, you can show it to them and they'll understand that really easily. So a few kind of wrapping up comments. Sales cycle, like I mentioned, usually anything more than 3 months is too long. One quick comment, especially with tech companies, is if you're looking at tech, usually a lot of the biggest problems is a lot of people like to do free trials. They like to do freemium model. And when they're doing that, what you'll find is the sales cycle is naturally extended. Because if you have a 14-day free trial, then your sales cycle is at minimum 14 days. If you have a 1 month free trial, your sales cycle is at a minimum 1 month. So what you want to do instead is if you have a paywall or paygate, you want to try to have a volume-based paywall or paygate. So that's actually more around, like, let's say if you use our product or service, if you go over a certain limit, like if you send 5 emails, it's free. If you send 25 emails, you have to start paying for it at a certain price. So the idea is then you have different tiers based on the volume as well. So as your customer becomes more successful, you can also become more successful with them as well. So that's my recommendation when it comes to how you strategically place your pay gate and try to shorten the sales cycle as well. And like I mentioned, try to avoid contracts, try to avoid formalities if you can. Oof. Ling, sorry, I know you want to try to look at the 3 to 5 most important strategies. I'd say all of these are kind of important. It just really depends on your business. So you don't have to take everything that I've said at face value. Each company will implement different things more heavily, so it really depends. And I think there's no easy one-size-fits-all. So unfortunately, like if you want really good feedback, then you would have to kind of share with me what you're doing, what details you have, who your customers are, what your products are, and what challenges you have. Cool. But yeah, I'm doing this more as a one-on-one just to give you a sense of like what is possible and what are kind of the different elements in different things. And this is, again, like I'm only being very high level here. There's actually still a lot more details behind a lot of the strategies that I share. So a few quick words on the technique side of things. I think this is quite relevant for me, Joel, since you say you're comfortable with the process of selling. It is really mostly just a journey between two people, right? Your goal is you're trying to get to that better future with the other person, and you're showing them a path to get there. Rejection is very normal, like Ling was mentioned. No, it's not the end of the road. No, it's just a detour. So you will be faced with rejection. Don't take rejection personally. And also when you think about rejection is you want to really understand why they're rejecting you as well. If you are someone who personally really struggles with rejection, there's this great video, this TED Talk by Jia Zhang. And I think the title of the TED Talk to watch is 100 Days of Rejection. So what he did is he went out for 100 days and he asked all sorts of different stuff to just try to get rejected as much as possible and see what he can learn from it. So he asked different things like, hey, can I teach a course at a university? He asked I think a Dunkin' Donuts employee to actually create donuts that were in shape of Olympic rings and linked together. And he learned some really amazing things from the TED Talk, from actually doing that experiment of going out and putting himself out there. And I encourage you to watch it because it really shows you that a lot of the times when we get rejected, we play it in our own minds, and the reasons why we're being rejected are often not what we think it is. So yeah, don't be too intimidated by the process. And like I mentioned, you want to leave them better than when you found them. Quick comment over here. A lot of people think that telling and selling, so sales is usually where you're speaking a lot, and then customer discovery is where you're doing asking and listening. Sales is really a bit of both. You're doing a lot of, it's more of a dialogue. You're asking, you're really listening, you want to understand your customer, and then you pitch. As a matter of fact, good salespeople will say like the talking part is only about 20%. You're spending 80% of the time listening. Ling has a quick comment, personal charm, persona, and karma. Yeah, I think luck matters a little bit, but luck probably not as much as we think it does in this day and age. when it comes to personal charm and persona, I think a lot of people worry about that because there's only so much you can do to change personal charm. Like these kind of things don't happen overnight. It's really hard to change your behavior, and it's really hard to manufacture a false identity or come across as someone that you are not normally behaving as. So actually, I believe that the best sales process of the salespeople are people who are natural, and you don't need to really adjust. But that means that, of course, there are methods that help you just kind of improve small techniques. It's not about manipulation, but it's more about how can you be a bit more friendly? How can you ask the right questions? How can you have the right opening statements, things like that. So yeah, attitude, image, definitely important as well. Some light comments here, PSA versus PAS. So PSA is the default or more traditional way of pitching. People start by focusing on the problem, and then they talk about the solution, and then they wrap it up with the alternatives. Why PSA is bad is because the better way is actually PAS. And what you want to do with PAS is you talk about the problems, and then you actually talk about all the different alternatives before you pitch your solution. The reason why that's important is because if you do PSA, what usually happens in the interaction is you talk about a problem, you go through the solution, and then the customer is left to decide and do their own research on alternatives, and they might never come back to you. They might actually go with another competitor. But if you involve the discussion on alternatives, the competitive shopping actually becomes part of the sales process, and you're actually really having a say in how you're different from the competitors in the interaction. So I hope that this kind of gives you an idea of how you can better position yourself when you're pitching. Value proposition versus problem. Quick comment here is just a lot of people focus on feature pitching. They're focused on pitching the product itself. That's not the right way of thinking of value proposition. A better way of thinking about it is, what does your product enable your customer to do? That is what people buy. So in sales, they have this term called sell them what they want, give them what they need. So if you look at doctors, for example, doctors will often prescribe things, but people will not actually listen and not actually change their behavior. They might say, oh, you need to diet, you need to lose weight, you need to exercise, but still people exhibit the same bad behavior because that's not what customers actually want, even though they need it, right? So if you're a good salesperson, you will know that customer actually wants something else. That might be, maybe you want to be fit because you want to impress someone. Maybe you want to, go on a date. Maybe you want to live longer and have good times with your grandchildren or whatever it is. So the idea is, if you sell your customer what they want, they will buy what they need. I'm gonna lightly touch on this as well. Feature, benefit, value. Basically, when you're pitching, you don't pitch features. You're not talking about the 12 megapixel camera. No one cares about that. What does the 12 megapixel camera mean to them? What's the benefit? They take clearer pictures. What's the value? They never miss an important moment in their life, right? So the idea is, you always want to focus and hone in on the values and the benefits rather than the features. Sales tools. This is a takeaway. I'm not going to actually speak to this slide. So this is just an example of a sales stack. You can click on the links to follow and check out some of the different tools. Building a sales team. Just want to highlight, usually for salespeople, if you're launching a new business, actually try not to hire people that have too much experience. People who have less experience are better for startups, because when they have big company experience, they tend to have a very in-the-box thinking. They don't tend to ask much questions. They make a lot of assumptions. They don't tend to follow up very well. People who lack experience are actually better because they are more curious. They're willing to problem solve. They're willing to try different ways to convert the customers, and that actually makes a better salesperson. A good initial salesperson is someone who is inquisitive. They're very curious about the customer, and they really believe in your product. I cannot emphasize that enough. No matter what, if they don't believe in your product or service, they don't believe in the value of it, they will not make a good salesperson. So if you're working for a company and if you don't believe in the value of the product that your company carries, then you simply will not be a top salesperson. It's just really difficult to be artificial about your product or your belief in the product. So like I mentioned, values and culture need to align. They need to really believe in the mission of the company. And when it comes to compensating them, so if you're wondering how can I pay my salespeople, especially if you're an early startup, the good news is commission is actually not the right way to describe compensation, because when you think about commission, what it actually does, so there's this great video called The Puzzle of Motivation by Dan Pink. It's a TED Talk. And what Dan talks about is commission actually gives people a narrow-minded view of things. It helps people do more things, more of the same behaviors, but it predicates that those behaviors need to be proven behaviors. So for example, if you're in manufacturing, if you produce a larger volume by doing the same process, and you can incentivize them with commission to increase the output. But actually what that will do is commission will eliminate creativity. Commission encourages people to do more of the same things. It doesn't actually encourage people to look at different options, different alternatives, because alternatives or options are risky. And if they try to experiment, they're less likely to actually perform in the short term better. So if they are purely motivated by commission, that actually doesn't give you good results. So instead, what you should focus on is you want to motivate people by giving them a sense of autonomy. You want to give them full freedom and control over testing, running experiments. You want to give them a sense of mastery of the art. You want to make them feel like they're learning new things, so they're getting better at the sales process. And they need to, of course, believe that your product or service is fulfilling this purpose that they believe in as well. So that's actually the right way to approach it. So instead of using the word commission, my encouragement for you is to use the word revenue share. Because revenue share, you're actually bringing them on board as someone who is on the same journey of this mission or purpose that your company is doing. You're saying that, hey, you know what? You're selling and there is no limit to the commission. It is revenue share. You get whatever percentage that we give. Maybe it's 50-50, maybe it's 70-30, whatever it is. But the idea is they are a part of the journey as well. And they have a bit more autonomy around how they want to come about with a solution. So even small words like just changing commission to revenue share makes a big difference. Sales goals, final comment I promise, is when you're thinking about sales goals and how to set metrics, metrics are important, but don't measure for the sake of measuring, because the process is equally important. So for example, if you have a process and all you care about is your monthly target at the end of the month, it might encourage your reps to actually overlook the process that goes on behind it. So for example, let's say car dealerships. Car dealerships, they have a monthly quota to hit. And what that might make some teams do is, let's say if you have team A versus team B. And in team A's case, they are doing everything to hit their monthly quota. So what they're doing is they're discounting, they're getting their sales reps to actually manipulate customers to actually get the customers to buy more readily. Versus if you have team B, where the sales reps are a bit slower in terms of getting sales, they might not hit their monthly targets, but they're focused a lot more on improving their techniques, improving relationships with customers, encouraging referrals. In the long run, team B is going to win, although team A is actually hitting their targets on a monthly basis. So if you primarily incentivize people to hit targets on a monthly basis, and you just focus on the goals for the sake of goals, and you don't focus on the process and systems that go on behind, then you might actually build a very toxic culture in your company as well. So you just have to be mindful of that. Whoops. So that is it. A lot for this presentation. I went a bit over time. This is my email. I'm going to type it out in the chat as well. Chin@psaisbad.com. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and my name is Chin Chang. So just send me an email if you want the slides, if you want a recording. I'm just going to quickly wrap up with some other stuff because I know some of you might be wondering, a lot of great content, but I want to learn more. I want to figure out, I still have a lot of questions. How do I kind of get more support? So if you are looking for more support, not exactly a sales pitch here, but the idea is I just want to make sure that you're clear on how you can work with me. I am running a Startup Sales Academy in August. And the idea behind this is it's a more comprehensive 1 month long program. And I will work with you throughout the month to actually help you with building some of those processes that I talked about, to create your sales map, to help you actually create your scripts, to actually create your templates, your landing pages, your emails. And if you're curious about that, I'll just quickly give you a light peek on that. Get out of this full screen. Oops. So this is the Sales Academy. And it is really more for B2B specifically. So if you're in B2C space, this is not for you. But if you're B2B or if you are a recent hire in a company, and like I mentioned, your customer lifetime value should at least be actually 3,000 in this case because you're more B2B. What I'm going to be covering is more of the fundamentals, the strategy, and the techniques. So I'll talk about things like sales tools in more detail. I'll go into list building, prospecting. I'll show you exactly how to find customers, how to get their emails, how to craft the right emails to actually reach out to them and convert them. I'll talk about overcoming objections, closing, negotiating. So I'll go into a lot more details. We'll also touch on more strategic things like how do you come up with the right pricing, how do you use the right revenue model, how do you design sales experiments. You'll get all the templates that I talked about and a lot more. I have copywriting checklists, customer persona templates. It is going to be quite intensive. So it is about 5 hours a week for the sessions plus assignments. And it is a program that costs a bit as well. So if you're interested in that, you can learn more. I'll post a link to this program over here in the chat as well. But enough about that. I think that is basically it for the session. We are at 7:42, a bit over time. So yeah, any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to answer and help you out. And I'll hang around for a few more minutes as well. So feel free to jump in, unmute, or put in chat if you have more questions.
Thanks a lot, Chen. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'll happily be sending you an email with inquiries and for a couple tools there. So thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate the time.
No problem. Glad you enjoyed it. All right. Have a good night or morning, wherever you are. See you.